Welcome everyone to today's Irregular Income webinar. My name is Eliana Kleiner. I'm a financial educator at the Credit Counseling Society. I just want to go over, once again, just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You should each have access to the group chat, so if you do have any questions or comments or even just like input to offer, you can feel free to share it via the chat. If for any reason you're not able to see the slides at any point, don't worry too much because the audio really is the most important part. The slides are a lot of bullet point information, and I can always provide a copy of the slides as well. Yeah, so before we get started, I'll just give it a couple seconds if anyone has any questions. Not seeing anything in there, so I'm just going to go ahead. So for those of you who might not be entirely sure of who we are, what we do at the Credit Counseling Society, we are a nonprofit organization and we serve residents from BC all the way to Ontario, which is where I am currently, as well as across the 3 territories. Our motto is that we help, we educate, and we give hope. So we help predominantly via our credit counseling appointments. These are at no cost to clients whatsoever and are completely unlimited. Prior to the pandemic, we did a lot of in-person appointments and you kind of had to have an office near you. But now we do a lot of over the phone stuff, a lot of video appointments. We have lots of different accessibility options, lots of like interpretation services. If English isn't your native language and you want to speak to someone in a language you're more comfortable in, we've got lots and lots of stuff there. We educate by offering webinars and workshops, much like this one, as well as a lot of really great information, some different tools and some resources on our financial literacy website, and that is mymoneycoach.ca. I'm going to leave it in the chat. Oh, sorry, I can't type and speak at the same time. There we go. And we hear from clients all the time, really, that just by calling in, booking an appointment, or speaking to someone quickly, they feel a great renewed sense of hope. And it really is our goal in absolutely everything that we do to be able to keep providing that hope to all of our clients and everyone that calls in. So diving in for today, we're going to explore what some of the challenges of having an irregular income might be, regardless of what type of irregular income you currently are dealing with. And we'll go through those in a bit. Some different strategies to manage those challenges, and then the role of budgeting and expense tracking and how that can help us to navigate the challenges of an irregular income. So by the end of this hour, my hope is that you're going to be able to list some ways to manage a regular income, to understand the role of savings, and to know how to manage your situation at least a little better. So there could be several reasons for why you might be earning an irregular income. It could be that maybe you're a business owner, you're a contractor, your work is casual. I believe this is the one that kind of covers it for most of the folks that are going to be attending today, which is that hours might vary week to week, or that work is seasonal. So whatever your circumstances might be, some challenges associated with earning an irregular income can include predicting your income for a given month. Maybe it's really challenging to not be using credit during months when maybe our income isn't as high as a previous month. Lifestyle inflation during months when your income is a little higher. So say you work more hours, you have lots of overtime during one month, and you decide, you know what, I'm going to go out for dinner a little more often. And then you get used to that, and the next month is a little bit tougher. We also have just general stress from feeling disorganized at having a regular income. and stress from having limited protection. For example, possibly not having employment insurance or disability insurance as sort of that safety net in case something goes wrong. So, where do we really start when we're looking at approaching some of those challenges? We're going to break our approach down into a few different categories. So, we're going to look at income, which is obviously a very important aspect of irregular income. We're going to look at expenses, and we're going to look at savings, taxes, protection, and really any sort of extras that might be prudent to plan for in the future. The plan itself can be kind of considered a budget or like a spending savings plan kind of thing. So this is all going to go into the piece where we're going to be looking at creating a budget. So really managing that irregular income as effectively as we possibly can. Remember too that creating a budget is going to revolve around what your income is or what you can possibly predict that it might be. So we recommend starting by asking yourself, what is the minimum monthly income that you might need? What was maybe an average income over the past 12 months, the past 6 months, past 2 years, whatever information you have, you're going to want to use it there. And then are there any ways that you can create stable, regular income? That might not be the case for lots of folks here, because if you're working a certain amount of hours, that's just what it is. But it's a piece that we're going to look at anyways, because it is interesting to take a look at. So once you have the answers to those questions, you could consider looking for ways to create a little bit more stability for yourself. For example, would it be feasible to get something like a part-time job with regular work hours? And this isn't the case for everyone. Is it possible for you to get a reliable contract that's going to provide you with maybe a more consistent income for a set number of months? Do you have maybe a partner or a spouse that has regular income and that can create a little bit more stability in that budget? Or maybe a property that you can utilize as a source of steady income. And when we're talking about reliable contracts, for example, take your like short-term contracts to longer-term contracts as maybe an incentive to the other party, you reduce your fees slightly if that's something that you're dealing with. So the offset in that sort of situation might be that your income could go down a bit, but you've greatly stabilized that income and made things a little bit easier for yourself. What I think is the most important thing is really familiarizing yourself with your expenses. So it's valuable to start by reviewing your expenses because it's really important to work around what is fixed. So knowing your expenses is going to help make that budget work. So you're going to need to look at your fixed expenses, your cash or variable expenses, any sort of savings expenses, and of course, being an irregular income earner, you likely have to allocate money towards work, business, or taxes, especially taxes in this case. So when you're dealing with irregular income, it can be useful to use a separate bank account to manage each of these types of expenses. So managing things like rent or a mortgage payment and your phone bill, things that you know are going to be the same every single month in one bank account. Looking at sort of your variable expenses, so maybe things like groceries, gas, entertainment for the month, having that in a separate account, having your savings in some sort of a savings account, like maybe a TFSA, maybe just a regular high interest savings account, and then having that money set aside for taxes at the end of the year is a really great idea. Maybe even taking a portion of each of your paychecks and putting that towards taxes if that's not something that's already being done automatically for you. So first, we're going to take a look a little bit more in depth at fixed expenses. So these are the ones that cost the same amount every single time they come up, and they come up on the same day at the same time every time. So this can include, like we talked about, things like rent or mortgage payments, car payments, utility bills, things like that. So fixed expenses really are the easiest to remember because they don't change. And they can also sometimes be the hardest to manage because you might have to carry money over from one paycheck to the next in order to be able to cover them. Because often our fixed expenses will come out right at the end of the month or right at the start of the month, and it's just kind of all at once. Next, we have our cash or variable expenses. So these are expenses that we know are 100% for sure they're going to come up, but they might vary in terms of the amount that they cost us every month or the date on which they come up. So, like we talked about, this would include something like groceries or gas or entertainment. So cash or variable expenses are challenging because they don't fall into a schedule like your fixed expenses do. So knowing a general amount that you spend on each item in this category that you can manage on a weekly basis is really going to help to keep your spending more balanced. It's also a good idea to assess where you might be able to maybe cut back on these types of expenses during months when your income might not be where you need it to be. So maybe this is things like buying no-name brand foods at the grocery store during those months where things are a little bit tougher. Maybe using your car a little bit less and trying to walk or bike ride or take public transit during those months where, again, things are a little bit tighter. Maybe you have to cancel a streaming service or two or go out with friends less. So it's important to really, really take a very deep look at what your variable expenses are and what you can manage. Important to note, your variable expense account should really be the only one that is linked to your bank card. So this is going to be the only one where you go to a store and you tap your card, and that's the account where it's going to come out of. Your fixed expenses, normally that sort of stuff is like an automatic withdrawal. So you don't really need that access on your bank card to it. And it's just good because then you're not tempted to dip into those other accounts when you are out and doing things or when you're making purchases that aren't fixed. Because you want to make sure that you have that fixed, the money in that fixed account for the end or the beginning of the month when things automatically come out. Yeah, I can share the PowerPoint with Carissa afterwards, and maybe she can distribute it to the people who attended today, just for future reference. So you also have to plan for work or business expenses. So this would be things like taxes. So these are expenses that can vary in frequency and can include items like maybe work supplies, clothing, transportation to and from work, maybe your cell phone, other technology, maybe you need a laptop for work. So it's important to keep really detailed records of these work expenses for tax purposes. We recommend having a filing system or a way to organize your receipts because having things organized and ready for filing can be a lot easier on you when tax time comes around. I'll use myself as an example. I don't earn an irregular income, but I do work from home. So there's a lot of expenses that I have on a day-to-day basis, like my cell phone plan, part of my rent for my apartment, my laptop that I need to document so that when tax season comes around, I can claim those sorts of things and get a little bit of money back. So it's just important to keep all of those things very, very organized so it's easier on you when it comes time to give that to your accountant or if you do your taxes on your own. Lastly, we have savings expenses. So this is money that you should set aside for things like irregular or seasonal expenses like clothing, vet bills, property taxes if you're a homeowner, maybe car maintenance, utilities, gifts for the holidays. It can also include money that you're setting aside for emergencies, maybe money that you're setting aside for taxes, and maybe personal savings goals as well. I'll give an example. For example, maybe you're saving up for a vacation or for like the newest iPhone. When it comes to setting money aside for these sorts of savings expenses, it's very important to be aware of the temptation to stop putting money into savings when maybe your income is a little bit leaner. So that's why we like to say that you should treat your savings expense as an expense where you are the creditor and you owe yourself that money. So, really getting into the habit of paying yourself first. So, we're going to break down different types of savings expenses now, and we're going to start off with irregular expenses. So, some irregular expenses, like we talked about, might include property taxes, car insurance, maybe car maintenance, things like clothing, hair care, hobbies. Again, really everything that we can think of that we don't really know when we might want it. We don't know, or maybe we don't know how much it's going to be, but it is something that we're going to have to spend money on during the year to come. So when it comes to managing those sorts of expenses, it's best to create a plan on how to deal with them. So that's going to include, like we talked about, opening up a new bank account in order to save for those expenses. So similar to how we're going to take the average of our income over maybe 12 months, 6 months, 24 months, whatever information we can get our hands on, you're going to want to add up the cost of every irregular expense over the course of an entire year, ideally, maybe a little less if you don't really have all of that information readily available. And then you'll divide that number by 12 or by 26 and deposit that amount into your new account, either on a monthly basis if you divided it by 12, or a biweekly basis if you divided it by 26. After that, it really is just a matter of tracking the ins and the outs of that account, ensuring that you have what is necessary in there for that irregular expense that you know is going to be coming up. A few more things that can be useful to think about when you're managing your irregular expenses is, is that dollar amount or the number that you're working with feasible for you? And if not, where can we cut back here? Can we maybe decide that we're going to skip going to the hair salon this month, or maybe we're going to go to a salon school where things are a little bit cheaper and your haircuts are still looked over by a professional. It's just done by a student and can be like 50% cheaper. Maybe we cut down on holiday gifts and we decide we're not going to get gifts for, our partners and we're just going to do kids this year. There's lots of ways to look at it and see where you can cut back. So if that dollar amount isn't working for you, again, cutting back on where you can, and if you are still struggling with managing that budget, with creating that budget, you can always give us a call. It's really what we're here for. We can help you with budgeting by offering strategies on maybe how to make things work for you, looking at the big picture, seeing what we can do. Sometimes it just helps to have a second set of eyes, and maybe we can see things that you can't necessarily see in there. So, just as an example, if we're using that $3,000 example we started off with, we would have to set aside 250 every month or 116 per biweekly paycheck. So, irregular expenses aside, what if things come up unexpectedly, like an emergency? So, emergencies happen. We all know that. We just don't know when they're going to happen, what they're going to be, or how much they're going to cost us. So, in an ideal world, the hope is that if you are able to create something like an emergency fund, you would be able to manage most emergencies and really turn them into financial inconveniences. So we recommend trying to save $1,000 for a short-term emergency fund. And now we know that that $1,000 is absolutely not going to cover every single emergency that could possibly happen, but it's a really good place to start. So maybe if that sort of big number feels a little bit daunting, you could try breaking it down into some smaller numbers so it feels a little bit more manageable. For example, maybe we decide we're going to do $40 every biweekly paycheck, or we're going to do $10 a week. It's really, really up to you what you can manage. Now, when it comes to a longer term emergency savings goal, that might include saving for 3 to 6 months of income. The amount involved here, because we're not looking at a fixed number, it's going to look different from person to person, depending on where we live, because that obviously impacts our cost of living, depending on how many dependents we have, and if there are any sort of special needs that need to be met in our own households. So the reason why we recommend that 3 to 6 months worth of income or worth of expenses, if possible, is because it generally takes that length of time for people to get back on their feet, whether it's through like an unexpected layoff or maybe a family emergency, usually about 3 to 6 months. So, all of that being said, I do want to reiterate that this is the hope in an ideal situation. And we know that not all of us are living in ideal situations. So, it might not be that simple for us to save up those exact amounts for emergencies. That's why another strategy that might work here is to assess what might prove to be an emergency in your own life. For example, we could take an example of the number one emergency in Canada, which is a car emergency. And then we take a look at how much that costs on average, and we get $500. So maybe if you have a car, it could be worthwhile just planning out how you can save up $500 for a potential car emergency. Another example I like to offer is, say you live in BC and your family lives in Quebec or in a completely different country altogether, and an emergency comes up where you need to hop on a plane, get to your family as soon as possible. How much is that plane ticket going to cost you? So it might be worth researching now so that you can create an emergency savings plan for whatever emergency you think might come up in your life. So essentially, the strategy to follow, if you can't do the sort of long-term 3 to 6 months thing, or even that $1,000 short-term thing, is to assess what in your life might present as an emergency in the days to come and try your best to plan for that specific emergency. It can help just to alleviate the pressure of trying to save up exactly that $1,000 for a short-term goal or exactly 3 to 6 months worth of income as a long-term goal. It's also important to remember that the most important thing is to focus on the act of putting money into savings and not getting super hung up on the exact amount that you're putting away each month. To be clear, it's always great to have some sort of a fixed goal of putting a specific amount of money away, whether it be for your emergency savings or even for goal savings. But let's say your goal is to put $50 away biweekly, and there's some months where you can really only do $20, $10, $5, or even less. That's totally okay. If we start getting really, really hung up on the amount that we're putting away, it can leave us feeling deflated, demoralized if we're not able to put that exact amount aside in a particular month. So it's important to focus on keeping up with the habit of putting money away however we can to keep us motivated to save any amount that we are able to save. So in those months where maybe the income isn't as high as maybe the month before, putting away $2, you're still putting something away. You're still doing something. And maybe it's all you can do, but it's going to keep you in that habit of being in the savings sort of mindset. So now we're going to take a look at managing our income. So we're going to look at setting aside money for various savings goals. And there are two different systems you can explore here. So one involves having a holding account, and the other one involves having two separate budgets. So let's talk about the holding account system first. So with the holding account, all of your income is going to go into one account from which you would draw your income during the months that you have lower income or potentially even no income. So think of the holding account sort of as your employer in this sort of scenario. So you would need to determine the amount you need to support yourself during your low or no income periods and set aside an amount weekly, biweekly, monthly into that holding account. And it's going to add up to that required pay amount. So during the times that you're not working or the times where your income is maybe just not really meeting your expenses, you can then withdraw the determined amount, so your like regular paycheck from that holding account. So this would be a visual representation of what having a holding account can look like. So you see that your income is going into one account, the holding account, and you are withdrawing from that one account during months where you have low or no income, ensuring that you're putting enough into your fixed expenses account to take care of those regular monthly bills. You're putting aside what you need to into your variable savings account and into your goal savings account, which would include those irregular expenses and emergency savings accounts. So in order to determine what your required monthly income is, you can start with assessing your required average annual income first. So in order to do this, you would need to add up your annual income from, say, the past 2 or 3 years, and then you can divide that amount by 2 or 3, depending on which one you chose, to determine your required annual average. So to determine your average monthly income from this, you'd need to divide that by 12 since there's 12 months in the year. For example, we're going to add up 45,000, 36,000, and 40,000. Divide that by 3. That gives us an annual average income of 40,333. Then we're going to divide that by 12 and see that the monthly average income required is 3,361. So if you're doing some sort of seasonal work, say, and you generally have the same off seasons year over year, using the average of your last 3 years can be helpful. If, say, you just have certain months that you know that you work more in, and certain months where you work a lot less, this can also be useful, even if it's just really spread out and sporadic, still a really useful way to determine that. So using an average monthly income could work if maybe you don't have that few years of history. In this scenario, you'd need to add up your monthly income from, say, the past 3 months, then divide that amount by three to determine your required monthly average. So in this example, we're adding up 4,500, 5,400, and 1,200, dividing the number by three, and that gives us an average monthly amount of 3,700 per month. For maybe something a little bit more accurate, you could use 6 months if that's available to you and look at what that gives you. You could take a look at maybe your highest earning month, your lowest earning month, and a middle month and see if maybe that number feels a little bit better for you. But this is really just giving us a number to work with, something that we can use for this sort of account scenario. So if you do choose to set up the holding account for yourself, it's important to remember to keep track of that money and the accounts. So how much is coming in, how much is coming out, contribute to that savings monthly, and then trying your best not to rely on credit to supplement your income because that can be a very slippery slope. So our next system is the two budget system. So this might work best for those who have sort of more predictable changes in income. This would require you to sort of adjust your variable spending and savings contributions depending on whether you're, earning your more regular income or if maybe your hours have been cut back a little bit. So as part of using the two budget system, it's advisable that you know your monthly cost of living, and you put money into savings monthly. You know where you can cut back during those leaner months. So like that previous example I gave, maybe purchasing lower quality produce or buying no name brand items at the grocery store. And then not depending, once again, on credit to supplement income. So with the two budget system, essentially, you are working off of the same budget where you have figured out your expenses. So figuring out those expenses is step number one. What this means is your fixed expenses will not change. So it would be a better idea to reduce your variable expenses and maybe your savings expenses during those leaner months. You can also create sort of a hybrid system where you're using a bit of both. So using the holding account system and this system, in a case like that, you would continue to contribute to the holding account and adjust your contribution to the operating accounts as needed. The operating account is the account from which you would be paying your fixed expenses, your variable expenses, and your savings expenses. So during those sort of leaner months, the temptation to stop putting money into savings altogether can feel very real. In the short term, it might seem like that's your best decision, but it will hurt your budget in the long run. So maybe consider instead adjusting how much you spend with your cash and your variable expenses. So reducing your spending on food when possible. So on things like maybe eating out or ordering in, buying foods and drinks that you might want but not necessarily need, like maybe cutting back on coffees at lunch when you're at work and bringing coffee from home, things like that. Reducing your spending on entertainment and any sort of like marketing or networking costs. That's really more if you own your own business. Cutting back on expenses wherever possible, but not eliminating contributing to your savings entirely. So once again, it's okay if you can't put the amount that you would have if this was more of your higher earning month. As long as you're putting something aside, that's what matters most. We want to focus on building that habit, on setting money aside without getting overly hung up on the exact amount that we're setting aside, because that can lead to feelings of discouragement. We just want to ensure that we don't lose our motivation to keep up with contributing to our savings. So, irregular income is difficult to budget for, so we always recommend tracking where your money is going. So, this is going to involve becoming very detail oriented. One strategy that might be able to help is to practice expense tracking. So, this is a way to keep yourself organized by way of having maybe separate accounts. Expense tracking will revolve around your budget. So, if you don't have a budget yet, we always encourage you to start with creating one first because the expense tracking piece is going to sort of help you stick to that budget. A lot of people find it really tedious, but regardless of your feelings around it, it's one of those things, just like keeping up with your savings. It's really important to build that sort of habit. So there's several different ways that you can handle tracking your expenses. There's no right way, there's no wrong way, but it's not a bad idea to try out a few different methods before deciding what your preferred method is. Personally, I use Excel spreadsheets, but I know a lot of bank apps actually offer like those sort of pie charts readily available in the online banking, shows you kind of roughly where your money is going. You could use pen and pencil, notepad sort of thing. You could use third-party apps as well, so things like Digitleaf and Wave. But with third-party apps that connect to your bank card or your credit card or any of your banking information, it's always important to read the fine print, even check with your bank first, because some banks might actually void any potential fraud insurance you have if you choose to use a third party app. So, always a good idea to check in with your bank first. And whatever system you decide to try, whether it's Excel, whether it's pen and paper, whether it's just the Notes app in your phone, you can track all of your expenses for a couple of weeks, see what you see. Or if that's a little bit too overwhelming, you could also start with just a couple of categories. So maybe you have groceries, you have gas, you have entertainment, and you have things that you really aren't sure about. Keep in mind, you might find it helpful to track also by type of store rather than by type of expense. So, grocery store, convenience store, coffee shop, restaurant, whatever works for you. It's really, really important when you're starting out to keep things as simple as possible rather than making them complex and like really overwhelming. So after a given period of time, say it's 2 weeks or so, you can take a look, see what you notice if there's anything kind of surprising, anything that you want to change in the future, or maybe you're just doing great and there's absolutely nothing that you need to change there. You never know. So once you have an idea of how much it costs for you to live, you can begin to set your priorities. So start assessing what something like an essential expense is, what a flexible need is, what expenses can kind of just wait altogether and are completely unnecessary. You could also take a look at what remains kind of unknown at that time, because really the reality is that no matter how organized you are, you might still not be able to know everything all of the time. And we all have different priorities for our households. So looking at what is essential might look different for each of us. So things like internet and phone costs, if you work from home, they're most likely a necessity and could be included in your housing and maybe utility estimate. And then you can look at what is flexible, what can wait, what's unknown. So regardless of your income, you are required to file income taxes every year. You can assess kind of how much you can expect to pay using one or both of these resources. Really looking at sort of CRA, past income history as well is helpful if you don't know exactly what your income is going to be. So it's important to note when we're talking about taxes that if you don't pay your taxes, you will likely accrue interest if you're owing on your taxes. The CRA is allowed to freeze your bank accounts. They can garnish your accounts and any employer paid income. So that means like taking a portion of your income every 2 weeks or every month whenever you get paid. They can garnish any receivables and let customers know that you're having tax trouble if you own a business. And they can place liens and force the sale of your business or personal property. So that's why it's really important, and you really want to make sure that you're avoiding any tax issues by saving for your taxes, keeping track of your work expenses for any sort of possible deductions, keeping business and personal accounts separate if you do own a business, keeping financial papers for 6 years, and then you can shred them after that. And then possibly getting expert help from a bookkeeper or an accountant when needed. Aside from planning for taxes, you also need to try and avoid debt. So, as such, it's important not to, if you do own a business, subsidize that business income with personal credit. It's important also to remember that credit and debt are sort of two separate things. So, credit is free. You can have available credit and it doesn't cost anything, unless obviously there's an annual fee, like for a credit card or something. But the minute you use credit, it becomes debt. And then the two kind of become intermeshed. So you can't have debt without credit, but you can have credit without debt. So once that credit turns into debt, starts gaining interest, starts becoming very, very expensive, and can be a bad thing. But it's really neither good or bad in general. It's really how you use it that can make it either helpful or harmful. So before we wrap up and I take some questions, I'd like to leave you with just the following tips. So really important to track your spending, be very mindful of lifestyle inflation, really commit to that budget and that savings plan, and possibly look for ways to stabilize income if it's an option for you. So my hope is that at this point, you are able to list the ways to manage irregular income, understand the role that savings plays, and know how to manage your situation a little better. So I will leave our contact information up while I take questions. Just to reiterate, here at the Credit Counseling Society, we offer no-cost credit and budgeting counseling. We're a nonprofit organization, and we aim to educate and empower people to find solutions to each of our respective financial difficulties. So I'll leave this up, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Give it a few more minutes here.
I think there was a question in the chat earlier, besides the PowerPoint question.
Oh, I'm not seeing anything.
Someone asked, how can you refer someone to this session if that person likes to, if they would like to learn about it? I guess
Oh,
this would be a great resource with the slide that you have up.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have a lot of information on our website, a lot of different resources on various saving tips, various things that, like saving on groceries. We've got things on how to stay out of debt, how to pay off credit faster, lots of stuff there. We offer sometimes public webinars on our website as well. So this might be one that comes up sometime in the next year. I would keep an eye out for that. We also have what we call our learning hub. So it contains like 5 to 7 minute long lessons, completely free to sign up. And you can take those lessons and you get like a little certificate at the end of them that say that you completed them. There's a lot of really good information there as well. And we're constantly adding to that because it's a pretty new thing that we've only started, I believe, a few weeks ago.